I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are at 2 o'clock. Welcome to today's Kernel of Knowledge webinar from the Greater Midwest region of the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. Tiffany Russell is going to be our presenter today, and she's going to be talking about trauma-informed approach in libraries. My name is Bobby Newman, and I'm going to be your host today. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Community Engagement and Outreach Specialist at the Greater Midwest region of the National Network of Library of Medicine located at the University of Iowa, hence the Kernel of Corn in our Kernel of Knowledge webinar series.
I was wondering about that.
I think we're almost in the funding period, so we'll kind of get rebranded, so that might change.
Okay.
We are part of the National Institutes of Health, the nation's leading agency, which includes 27 research institutes and offices. The National Library of Medicine is one of those institutes. Right now, you might be more familiar with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, where Dr. Fauci works. The National Network of Libraries of Medicine is the outreach arm of the National Library of Medicine and includes 8 regional libraries and 5 offices. And my office here at the University of Iowa serves a 10-state region. Oops, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and go ahead and hand off to Tiffany.
All righty. Now I do have that is disabled screen sharing.
Oops. Let me promote you. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. All right. All right, you can see that? All righty. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for attending on today. My name is Tiffany Russell. As Bobby mentioned, I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Michigan, Southwest Michigan to be exact. And I am a social worker at the Niles District Library. I work under a grant entitled Social Workers in Rural and Small Libraries. And the purpose of our grant is to connect patrons to resources and develop collaborative relationships within the community. So I thank you all for having me. I did see through the chat somebody in South Bend, Indiana, and so that would be my neighbor. So hello, shout out to you right here, only about 10 minutes away from me. So I do say hello to you there in South Bend. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, go Irish. So that's just a little bit about me and what I'm doing here. And I have here social worker libraries with a question mark. And so I think that it would be cool if you guys would just quickly put in the chat if you have heard of a social worker working in the library before, or even if you're fortunate enough to have a social worker in your library. I think that would be awesome if we could just kind of share that with everyone. So I see answers flying on the screen. Heard of it, don't have one. Not in our library, interns, part-time. So great, thank you for your feedback on that. I appreciate that. Before we get started, I always try to start every webinar or presentation that I do with just a really quick exercise, and it's just a breathing exercise. And I think that is really important, especially given this time that we're in when we are all attending everything basically that we're doing virtually. And I think that it's really important for us just to kind of ground ourselves and center ourselves. And so if any of you are familiar with deep breathing, that's just something really quick that I would love for us to do. Maybe you were rushing to get on, or you had one meeting that you had to end to get here. And so I think it's just a great way to kind of center ourselves and ground ourselves before we get to talking about this topic that we're talking about this afternoon. So if you are happen to be sitting at a desk or wherever you may be, if you can, Why don't you just plant your feet flat on the floor? And if you have arms on your chair, you can rest your arms on your chair or put your hands in your lap, something like that. But just make sure that you are kind of centered in your seating as well. So I'll give everybody a couple seconds to do that. And what we are going to do is just do some deep belly breathing. And so that's really simple. And I encourage people to do this often throughout their day. So remember that if you're, attending virtual meetings, or even if you're at a point where you're attending meetings in person, it's a great way to just kind of reset yourself, to kind of, ground yourself and kind of get back focused. So what we're going to do is we are going to take some deep breaths in, and you're going to hold it for 2, 3, 4, and then you're going to exhale. 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to do that again one more time. Deep breath in. 2, 3, 4. And then you're going to exhale. 2, 3, 4. Last time, deep breath in. Hold it 2, 3, 4. And exhale it. 2, 3, 4. So I think that that's always a great way to kind of just recenter and ground yourself before you start an activity, before you start a meeting. Even if you're watching something virtually and you're getting a little restless, it's just a great way to center and ground yourself. So thank you to all who participated in that. So let's jump right in here today, talking about trauma. And I think another reason why I like to do the breathing exercises is because sometimes topics that we're talking about can be a little heavy. They can be a little hard to talk about. And trauma is one of those topics. And so I will put the disclaimer out there that at any point during this time, if you feel like, you just can't tolerate the topic of trauma, or even if it brings up some things, if it is a trigger for you, I invite you to do that deep breathing exercise, or even if you need to step away, I think that is totally appropriate and fine to do that as well. So let's start with the definition of trauma. Trauma by definition. So individual trauma results from an event, series of events, a set of circumstance experienced by an individual as physically, emotionally harmful, life-threatening. And this has lasting adverse effects on that individual's functions, mental health, physical, social, emotional, spiritual well-being. And this definition is from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And did you know that the word trauma comes from the Greek word for wound? And it has evolved over the years to encompass both physical and emotional wounds. So fitting right in with that definition there. So let's ask ourselves this question about who is affected by trauma. And I guess, what does trauma look like? Or who does trauma look like? Maybe that would be a better way of thinking about it. Or what does someone look like that has even experienced trauma? So when you think about who is affected by trauma, I guess I would ask the question, who or what pops into your head? So here I have some examples of people who have experienced trauma. So when you look at celebrities, right? Maybe by the way they live their lifestyles now, you maybe don't think that they are people who have experienced trauma. But the people that I have here on our screen, they have. We have Oprah, who was abused as a child. We have Jim Carrey, who was homeless as a child. Him and his family lived in a van for a period of time after his father lost his job. We have Tyler Perry here, who was abused as a child. Nelson Mandela, who we all know spent years in prison. And then Charlize Theron, who, for those of you who do not know, her mother actually killed her father in self-defense. And so these examples have had some pretty traumatic experiences in their lifetimes. If you notice, the middle there is blank. There's just a screen there. And so I did that intentionally because I want you to think about maybe people you know. Think about whose face could be there. For some of us, our own face could be there, or our parents, or siblings, or coworkers, or people that we know. Think about who you know who could fit in that space. And when you think about that, I want you to remember that trauma does not discriminate. It doesn't discriminate at all. Most people throughout their lifetime will experience some form of trauma. And there are 3 types of trauma. There's acute trauma, and that is like a single stressful, dangerous event. And so I would venture to say that we're all kind of experiencing trauma right now as we navigate through this pandemic. Would you agree? There's chronic trauma, and that is repeat, prolonged exposure to stressful events. So let's say someone who is in a domestic violence situation or child abuse, someone who is experiencing child abuse. I see your comments about absolutely and yes coming through about us living through trauma right now. So I'm glad that there are some people that agree with that, because that is very true. We also have complex trauma, right? And that is when you are dealing in or exposed to multiple traumatic events. So keep in mind that there are different types of trauma, and those types of trauma at some point will probably affect us all. So there's this study, it's called ACEs, and that is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And if you would like, you can let me know if you've heard of this as well through the chat, just a quick yes or no. That would be awesome. And what the ACEs study is, great, I see a lot of yeses. The ACEs study is a study, some people are saying no, and that's okay as well. So the ACEs study, it's a study that shows how negative childhood experiences impact future health and functioning. So what it is you give yourself a point or not a point if you have experienced these things as a child. And the more adverse experiences you have, basically this study shows that the more likely you are to develop certain physical and mental health issues as you grow. And so this study helps in a way, it helps us understand the impact of traumatic experiences, and also it helps to show how great it is to utilize early intervention. And so I remember a quote when I was watching some information about the ACEs study, and it was talking about things that are preventable. So it said, what's predictable is preventable. So if we can predict that someone experiences these things and it leads to this, well, then we really should focus our efforts on eliminating that issue or that experience so that that person is not prone to more health issues or more mental health issues, physical health issues. If you haven't had a chance to read about the ACEs study, I would strongly recommend that. And it may, you may even want to look at the quiz yourself and just see, maybe where you fall. But it's really a helpful tool, and it's really something that I think everyone, especially working with human beings and working in helping professions, I think that everyone really can benefit from the knowledge of that. Let's talk about some other sources of trauma. And so I talked about how we have acute and chronic and complex, and you hear about really huge traumatic things happening to people. So you hear about domestic violence and child abuse and sexual abuse and things of that sort. But there's also other sources of trauma. And so here I have just a few a few sources here, other traumatic experiences and things that can be traumatizing for people. Generational poverty, structural and systemic racism, which is a huge topic that's going on, and we're seeing a lot of things play out in our world right now. Discrimination based on gender identity, some of the phobias there, racism, ableism, sexism, child abuse we mentioned already, intimate partner violence, and even immigration. So these are all other sources of trauma. And these can play out in people's lives in various ways. And so we've talked about all of those sources of trauma. And so I think it's really important that we think about the effects of trauma, right? And how trauma affects us. Trauma can affect us in various ways. Disrupt healthy development. So if you are experiencing trauma as a child, you can alter your development there. It affects relationships and family stability. And if you are someone, if you are someone who has a family member that has experienced a trauma, you probably can attest to how that relationship maybe went through a period when it was rocky for various reasons. Mental health issues, depression, anxiety, etc. Trauma can lead to all of those things. Substance abuse issues, this is a big one. There's a lot of studies that show that having a traumatic experience as a child, as a young adult, and even into adulthood can lead to substance abuse. Divorce, child abuse, increase in crime, poverty, unemployment, and also trauma can produce multi-generations of people with untreated trauma. So if the trauma or the situation doesn't get resolved, it can definitely be passed down through generations. Let's stop again and take a moment to just breathe. This is my dog. This is Chopper, the chocolate lab. And I snapped this picture of him in our yard one day. And the reason why I did is because I was so, first of all, he's not very calm. Let me just say that. He's not very calm, but I happened to capture a calm moment with him. And even for me, I was so surprised that he closed his eyes and sat there and really was just taking in the air. He really was just breathing in the air. And so I often will throw this slide in because I think that it's really important that we take those moments and just breathe. And I feel like maybe I went through the beginning slides a little bit fast, talking about trauma, but I really want us to take maybe just about 30 to 45 seconds and just kind of soak in what we just talked about. And maybe it was heavy, or maybe you came across some realizations that people have experienced trauma, or even yourself. And so I think that it's just a great time within our discussion to kind of stop and focus on Chopper, because I think he's pretty cute, and follow his lead and just breathe for just about 30 to 45 seconds. Thank you all. I happen to see some of your comments, and so thank you for saying that he's cute. He's very rambunctious though, so I'll just put that out there. So let's talk about why it's important to understand trauma. And here's a quote that SAMHSA, which is something else that the administration that I referred to earlier, has on their website and within their materials. And it says, since trauma can have serious effects on health, behaviors, relationships, work, school, and other aspects of life, it is important for behavioral health care and other providers to gain the knowledge and skills needed to promote healing, recovery, and wellness. So when we think about why we need to understand trauma, and so some of you may have said, when I started off, like the definition of trauma and, effects of trauma and who, what does trauma look like? You may have asked yourself, like, why are we going through all of that? But it's really important that we understand trauma and the concept of trauma. And reasons why, I have some listed here. It helps shape our interactions with people we serve. So when we understand trauma, we're able to kind of guide how we interact with people. It changes our perspective. It changes our approach in how we interact with people that we serve. It also helps to eliminate judgment, stereotypes, and biases. And so when we are in a place where we understand trauma, we understand the effects of trauma, and we can recognize trauma, it helps us not to be so judgmental. It helps kind of tear down those stereotypes that we've created in our minds about people. And it also, helps us check our biases as well. If we're real, if everyone is just real with each other and real with ourselves, we all have some type of bias, right? And so understanding trauma and the effects of trauma, it helps us kind of keep those things in check. It also helps us understand why people respond the way that they do. So if someone has experienced trauma throughout their lifetime, or they experienced something traumatic as a kid, they experienced something traumatic as a teenager, even as an adult, right? It helps us understand that it doesn't just, we don't think people are just doing things just to do them. But most of the time, there's a story. There's a reason behind why someone responds to a situation, why they respond to a circumstance in the way that they do. Also, understanding trauma helps prevent re-traumatizing individuals. And I cannot stress this point enough, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more as well. But we really want to put ourselves in a position to where we are not re-traumatizing anyone. If someone has already experienced something traumatic, the last thing that we want to do is to make that person's situation worse or re-traumatize them. And then it also helps us build trust with patrons. So because we have a trauma-informed approach, we're able to build trust with the patrons that we serve. We're able to build better relationships with the people that we serve. And that's just a win-win for everybody, in my opinion. So where do we begin? Big question mark here, right? Like, okay, I got the definition of trauma, some of the effects of trauma. Where do I start? Where do we start? Before we get to that, of course, I want to talk just for a second about the 4 R's of trauma-informed service. And you'll see how this all ties in together. And when we think about being trauma-informed within libraries, if there's anything you can remember, try to remember what these 4 R's are. So the 4 R's of trauma. Number 1, realize the impact of trauma and understand how it affects families, groups, communities, and the individual, right? Second one, recognize. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in the individual, family members, staff, and others involved with our systems. Third thing is respond. Respond by integrating the principles and knowledge of trauma in policies, procedures, and practices. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then the last one is resist, as I just mentioned, resist re-traumatizing the individual. Everyone has a role to play in responding to trauma. So if you're in the library system, if you're working in a library, no matter what your role is in that library. So whether you are in circulation, whether you are a reference library, whether you are desk staff, whether you are the person who does a beautiful job of keeping our facilities clean, whoever you are, security, maintenance, whoever you are, we all have a role to play in responding to trauma in our libraries. Let's talk about how we can apply trauma-informed approaches. And one of the biggest ways that I think you can do that is start with a person-centered approach. So tell me, quick yes or no, how many of you have heard the phrase person-centered approach? Person-centered plan, person-centered approach, those type of things. Okay, I see some answers coming in, some yeses, some nos. Okay, so if you are familiar, if you have anyone that has gone through like a medical experience, a lot of times you hear this word in hospitals, nursing facilities, things like that. You hear a person-centered plan, a person-centered treatment plan, a care plan, person-centered approaches, things like that. So by definition, this is what SAMHSA says, that person-centered care means consumers have control over their services, including the amount, duration, scope of services, as well as the choice of providers. Person-centered care also is respectful and responsive to the cultural, linguistic, and other social environmental needs of the individual. So that's, you know, the real swanky definition from SAMHSA. And so, you know, like I said, you see this oftentimes in nursing facilities, medical facilities, things like that. But really, when you get down to the meat of it, it's basically that a person is placed at the center of a service, and they are treated as a person first. And they're not treated by their circumstance or by a label. And so a few examples, and we'll talk a little bit more about people first language as well. But a few examples that I can think of right off the top of my head would be, you know, instead of saying the homeless guy that's always here on Tuesdays, we actually learn his name, you know, and it's, you know, John Doe that's here on Tuesdays. Instead of us, you know, labeling the lady with 8 kids, we learn her name and we learn, you know, some of her children's name as well. And so we don't focus on the person's circumstances. We don't attach labels to them, but we really try to create that person to be the center of the service. So whatever it is that they're here for, you know, we honor that. But we also, you know, want to be cautious and don't get into labeling people or identifying people by the circumstance that they are in. You might ask yourself the question, how do you respond to patrons experiencing trauma? How do you use a trauma-informed approach when dealing with patrons? And so there's a couple of points here that I have. And I think that each one of them kind of stand out, but they all really together help with just walking in that trauma-informed. So the first thing here is applying compassion. And, you know, this might seem pretty simple or self-explanatory, but, you know, sometimes we don't operate in compassion, and we, maybe get caught up in our day, and we're, busy, or we have rough moments ourselves. And so we often, forget to walk in that compassion. This is where, like I just talked about, we don't want to make judgments because of a person's situation, but instead we want to, try to put ourselves in that situation, or just operate from a place that shows compassion for that person. Acknowledging people's strengths. So instead of, like I said, focusing on a challenge or something that someone has, we want to acknowledge a person's strength. And a lot of times, even in ourselves, we don't necessarily see what our strengths are. But highlighting a person's strengths instead of their challenges is one of the best ways to do so. You also want to focus on behavior. And this is a really tough one. I know that it's a really tough one. It sounds tough to even say, but you want to look at the person as not being a challenge, but the behavior is being a challenge, right? And that's just a tough concept, especially if you have someone that maybe is exhibiting some really tough behaviors, but you really want to focus on the behavior and not attach it to that person. Also, creating welcoming spaces. You want to create an environment where everyone feels welcome. So that includes the older gentleman that comes to the library every day, all the way down to the person that's experiencing homelessness that comes to the library because they need to use the restroom. Back up to the mom who brings her children here, all the way down to the person that just stopped in because they need to charge their phone because it's about to die. So we want to make sure that the space that we create is welcoming to all people. And then we have people first language. And so we kind of just talked about this a little bit. Instead of labeling people, we want to look at them as a person first. So instead of calling me the girl with the chocolate lab, call me Tiffany. Asking a person, what their pronouns are. Asking a person, what do you prefer I call you? Mr. So-and-so, or am I able to call you by your first name? So operating in that standard of people first language. Also, the last thing, and this is one of the big things for me, is don't assume. And I often talk about the danger of assumptions. And I think that it's just important that we don't assume things about people because assuming things really can get us in trouble. You can make an assumption about the way that a person is dressed. You can make an assumption about the way a person smells. You can make an assumption about the amount of things that a person has with them. And it really just kind of creates that barrier there to kind of help us move towards the trauma-informed approach. There's a story that I'll share, an example, and if you have heard me talk, you may have heard me share this before, but not my particular library, but a library that my program partners with. There was an individual who came to the library and he was noticeably exhibiting some body odor, right? And so there was a lot of assumption about this person. There was a lot of assumption, basically assuming that this person was homeless. Well, come to find out, he actually was not homeless. But his situation got to a point where he did not have any water at his house and needed some assistance with getting that back in place. And so since he didn't have any water, he was unable to take a shower. And so obviously there was some body odor there. And so, what ended up happening was he was able to get connected to the right agencies and places to help him. And then his issue was resolved. And that was that. But imagine if someone had approached him, or imagine if someone had talked to him and just assumed that he was a person experiencing homelessness. We just have to make sure that we don't do that. There's really no point in making those assumptions about people, because we don't know people's full story. We only know what they share with us. And, it's really important that we just try to not make those assumptions about people. So applying trauma and a trauma-informed lens to policies and practices. And this is also kind of a hard one for people. And I will be the first to say that this probably is not going to be easy. But I think that if we begin with things like attending things like this, having conversations, that's the way to get started. And so I encourage everyone to have discussions about your policies and who they target. And there's a lot of policies across library land. There's a lot of things that, we have in place, a lot of rules, a lot of codes of conduct, all of those things. But I think that it's important to get to a point where you have a real transparent and open conversation about the policies and who they target. And some examples that I'll give you without stating opinions one way or the other. Some examples I'll give you would be policies about sleeping in the library. Also policies about belongings and how many belongings you can bring in or what you can bring into the library. And so we want to make sure that our policies are enforced with equity. And again, I know that that's not something that's easy. I don't know, I don't know what the magic answer would be to that. But I do know that it's just about having the conversation and making sure that we are asking ourselves, who are we targeting, and are our policies being enforced with equity? And yes, the last comment I see, babies break all the rules. That's a fact. That's a fact. So I think that's a good place to just pause. I think I'm actually getting to the end of my slides here. But if I could say or paint this picture in one slide, this would be the one. And I think when you think about trauma-informed approaches, here's a great analogy and a great way to kind of break that down. Talking about what's wrong with you and what happened to you. And we want to move from asking what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And if you take a moment and just think about the difference between these two questions, I think that, you might have maybe an aha moment. I know I did the first time I saw this. I thought that makes so much sense to say, instead of asking, like, what is wrong with you? How many of us have been guilty of that? What is wrong with you? What in the world is wrong? Or something along those lines. Moving to the question of what happened to you. Because if we ask what happened to you, that comes from a place of compassion. That comes from a place of care. That comes from a place of concern for people. And it also leaves a little bit of explanation about maybe why a person is responding the way that they are. Imagine approaching someone and just saying, like, what's wrong with you? As opposed to a more compassionate way of saying, what happened to you? And not that everyone is going to share their full life story with you in that moment, but if we lead with compassion, that's one of the best ways, to develop that trust with people. Also, it's one of the best ways to just create that environment where everyone in our facilities, in our libraries, will feel welcome. Yes, that's great. What happened to you and how can we help? I think that that's awesome. That's an awesome point there. So I encourage everybody to in social work, we do what we call as reframing. And so this would be a reframe. And so instead of asking what's wrong with you, we change that and asking someone, what happened to you? or what's happening with you. Is there something that you need? How can I help you? As opposed to those more invasive type of things, type of questions. So here you see my picture. It's a cookie cutter and with the big red X over it, right? And it's basically saying that there's no cookie cutter answer here. The same approach cannot be used for everyone. Each individual has their own unique story. And the more we learn about individuals and trauma, the more equipped we are to serve them. And so I know sometimes we attend things or we talk to people and we are looking for a clear and cut, straight to the point answer. Tell me what to do. And I think that that's not going to happen. Just to be blunt, it's not going to happen. And why is that? Because as I just stated, every individual is different. And so there's no cookie cutter way here to provide a service to someone, because we deal with people and everyone is different. Every person is different, and we never know what that person has experienced before they've walked through our doors. And so if we apply the things that we've talked about and think about our interactions first with people and say, how can I view this situation from a trauma-informed lens, through a trauma-informed lens, with a trauma-informed approach? Just take a few seconds and ask that question moving forward, then I think that we're moving in the right direction. So remember, there's no cookie cutter approach. So the key takeaways from the things that we've talked about. We talked about the definition of trauma and who experiences trauma. And remember that everyone probably at some point is going to experience trauma in their life. Trauma doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're white, if you're Black, if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're a child, if you're an adult. There's no discrimination when trauma is involved. Remember that trauma can cause other physical and mental disorders. And we talked about the importance of understanding trauma. And then we also talked about changing the way we respond to and how we think about trauma. So moving from what's wrong with you to what happened. And also that commitment to this, it's a work, right? We have to be committed to continuing this work in trauma. It's a process. It is a process. It's a process that will continue. It's a process that will change because people change, right? So there's no cookie cutter way to go through these interactions with people. There's no manual. There's no instruction booklet on dealing with people. But there are ways and there are things that we can do to apply trauma-informed approaches in our interactions with people. And thank you. That is my last slide. And so if there's any questions, I think Bobby was handling the chat. You guys are flying in the chat. So I gave up trying to read it a long time ago.
Yeah, there are about 250 of you. If you have questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A function to make sure. We've got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes for questions. So if you have questions for Tiffany, go ahead and post them in the Q&A function and I will get them to her, or she can read them, I guess. Either way. But I want to thank you for this, Tiffany. I think this was really great. And I think it was an introduction for a lot of people. I saw some really great conversation and questions that hopefully has a lot of us thinking about how we approach things.
Yeah. And I do want to say, this is really just introductory type of things, real basic trauma-informed approaches and kind of broken down. I mean, we can talk about trauma, there are trainings and seminars and webinars on trauma that last days, trauma is a heavy subject, and just, kind of the elements and all of the things that go into understanding trauma, it's a lot. Trauma can be a lot. But, if we just have that basic understanding, of what trauma is, how it affects people, and then how we can kind of shape our interactions based on that, that's a great place to start. But there's a lot of work behind trauma-informed approaches. So definitely.
All right. It looks like our first question is it appropriate to ask someone what happened to them? Maybe they don't want to divulge personal details. Do you have any suggestions for, maybe how to soften that approach?
Yeah. And with the what happened to them, I think it's more a way of how we think about things. It's not necessarily a question that you would ask a person, but it's just about how we think about things and how that will shape our approach towards that person. So instead of saying, what happened to you, you can ask a person, is there something I can help you with? Instead of saying, like, what's wrong with you, you can ask, just say, what's going on? I often approach people, first of all, introducing myself and asking them if there's anything that they need help with. And that is, much better than just approaching a person by saying, what's wrong with you? So I hope that helps.
So we have a question. Do you have an example of trauma-informed library policies that you might be willing to share?
Trauma-informed library. Well, but share as far as right now, or share as far as send you something? Which one are we talking?
You can send it.
Okay.
I will pass it on to everyone.
Yeah.
That's easier.
Yeah.
I think that goes along for this next question. Maybe, are there any additional specific training or resources for libraries that you'd recommend?
Actually, I have a couple of books that would be great for people to read. I think I saw one scrolling, The Body Keeps the Score. Yes, that's actually on my list of recommendations. There's a book called Furiously Happy. Trauma Stewardship is another one. There's a couple of those are good places for people to start with those. Are you holding up a book? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold it up, but the green screen won't see it. It's the trauma.
That's trauma stewardship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Okay. So let's see. The next one is, can you recommend any specific technique to use on days where you personally are 100% that help keep you in the person first trauma-informed frame of mind?
Can you read that again? Sorry.
So maybe on days where you personally are operating at 100%, what specific techniques might you use to keep yourself in that person first frame of mind?
Okay. Yep. I just pulled up the question, so I see it. So what my first suggestion would be is, as the social worker in me must talk about self-care. Self-sustaining, whatever you would like to call it. First of all, I think that if you are in a helping profession, you need to be intentional and deliberate about your self-care. You can't pour from an empty cup. Oftentimes when we are dealing with the public, when we're dealing with people, we ourselves go through what we call compassion fatigue, where we kind of take on, the issues of other people. We have people coming and sharing their stories with us all day long. It's exhausting. So the first thing I would say to combat that is making sure that you are engaging in self-care. So whatever that may be, physically, getting some exercise, going for walks, seeing a therapist if you need to, doing yoga, drinking tea, eating ice cream, whatever it is that is your form of self-care, being intentional about that. And then also, when you're getting to that point and you're here and it's just you and you're trying to do so many things, I would say before your interactions begin, just take maybe 5 to 10 seconds before you respond. Take a couple of deep breaths and then move forward with your interaction with that person.
Great. So one of the questions I want to get to, I'm going to skip a little bit.
Okay.
There was one about books for children. Yeah, I'm a children's librarian. Can you recommend books or resources that might be geared towards kids?
I'd be glad to send that to you, Bobby. I do have a list. I don't have it right in front of me, but I do have one.
Great. So just so everybody knows, I'll email out a link to the recording when it's been processed, which is about a week. And I will include the books that she recommended and the other resources that she's mentioning in that. So everybody who registered will get that information. Let's see, let's see. Are there any libraries that you think are doing a great job with this approach?
Mine. I think that there's a lot of libraries that are doing a great job with this approach. Even if you just type in Google, there's an input like trauma informed in libraries. There's a couple of libraries that are going to come up and talking about the work that they're doing behind trauma-informed approaches and trauma-informed service and care. And, I give credit to any library that's even taking part of the conversation, because it's just a great place to start. And like I said, there's no clear answer. There's nothing that we can say that's a manual on dealing with people. That's just like asking for a manual when you have a baby. Like, it's not going to happen. So I give credit to anybody that is taking part of these tough conversations and asking, what can we do to make our library more trauma informed?
And sort of along those lines, can you tell us a little bit more about your specific work in your library?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I say this all the time, but my key word now is prior to COVID. So before COVID, our program, we have the ability to have social work interns. And so my program partnered with 6 area libraries in Southwest Michigan. And I supervise those interns, and we develop a schedule for those interns to go to those other libraries. And they would be there for patrons to come in either by appointment or walk-in and assist people who are coming into the library, asking those questions, asking for help that librarians and library staff aren't technically supposed to be helping with. And so that is a lot of what we were doing prior to COVID. We were also working with other social service agencies, trying to make sure that people had the right information about the resources that were available. So trying to develop that collaborative relationship between the libraries and social service agencies, making things easier for people to access, having people come in and being here, instead of having a barrier of transportation, they maybe can come to the library and meet with someone. So we're doing things like that. I also do trainings and staff meetings and things like that with library staff as well. And we do have patrons that are coming into the library for assistance. Things do look a little bit different now with COVID and restrictions that every library has. Some of those libraries that we partnered with are still only doing curbside service. And so we've tried to offer some of our services virtually or at least by phone for people who need assistance.
I think that leads really well into this next question is, do you have any tips for taking trauma-informed approaches to an online interaction, since a lot of what we're doing is online now?
I think that things like this would be great. Also, providing some type of seminars or workshops about trauma. And I'm not sure who it was that was asking the question, but depending on what capacity you're working in, I definitely recommend trying to partner with other organizations, your mental health authority or counseling centers or things like that, getting with them and seeing how you can work together to get this type of information, this type of knowledge out to people. That is really helpful and beneficial as well.
Right. So this question you might want to look at yourself. That's kind of long. But
Okay.
I'm a medical librarian and I mostly serve staff, but I also work with my patient librarian colleague. I would love to know more tips on building trust and relationships with patrons who have medical trauma, particularly trans, Black, or Indigenous populations that have valid historical reasons for mistrust.
Wow. Is that from Amy?
Amy, yep.
Yeah. Amy, please write down my email and email me. That probably could be a whole nother half-hour conversation. But I do have, some tips on that. I think if I could just say one thing, it would be transparency. Just being transparent with people, and authentic, because people who have been deceived by systems already, that trust is broken. And so really you have to focus your efforts on building that trust first, before really you can make any progress with that at all. But shoot me an email. I'll be glad to have that conversation.
Great. Okay, let's see. So we've got time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
We cannot have a cookie cutter approach, but is there a tool you can use in approaching people? And in general, where can they learn more about trauma, which you kind of maybe already have?
You cannot have a cookie cutter approach. That's very true. I guess I missed part of the other part of the question. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
What was it after that? After we cannot have a cookie cutter approach?
Is there a tool or something you can recommend for approaching people?
Okay. I think I kind of mentioned already, when you are approaching people, especially if it's a situation where maybe it has escalated, or you can see that it's about to get to that point, just taking that few seconds to reflect and ask yourself what would be the best way to approach the situation. If it's not something like that, talking with someone first about how to handle a situation. I think conversation is great as well. Reaching out to other colleagues, building that relationship with other people to help you build those tools. And I remember there was a conversation through our email thread that was talking about how you build confidence. And to me, you build confidence by doing things over and over again. And so, even for me as a social worker who has dealt with all types of different things, I still have a little bit of nervousness when I'm approaching someone, or when the situation is a little unknown or it's scary. And I think that we need to let ourselves know that that's okay. And that as long as you operate from a place of compassion, that you and lead with that, then you should be okay.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. There are a few unanswered questions, and I apologize, we're not going to get to those. I want to go ahead and end on time. So I am going to do my little wrap up for the webinar here. Okay. So for those of you who are interested in this type of content, we have a couple of upcoming webinars that you may be interested in. One about self-care practices during the time of COVID that's specific for librarians, and that's going to be next Tuesday. And then we have one the following week about cutting through misinformation during COVID, which is something I think we all would like to see happen. And then that same week, we're also going to be having a self-care an additional self-care session. So as always, you're welcome to register for those. They are free and they will be recorded and posted later. If you're not a member of the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, please consider joining us. I just said the name wrong. We changed it this year. It's the Network of the National Library of Medicine, which is supposed to be more reflective of what we do. So everyone is welcome to join. All of our webinars and classes are free, and you can see more of them on our training website. If you have an idea for a webinar, if you think there's a health topic around something you're doing that's particularly interesting around health initiatives for patrons, health and wellness for library staff, or just environmental and behavioral impacts on health, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to host you. So I'm always up for that. Some of you will be looking for a link for continuing education. This webinar is providing one continuing education credit from the Medical Library Association. I do not have that code yet. Like everyone, we're all doing our best and they haven't gotten it to me yet. So I promise as soon as I have it, I will send it out to you. So in about a week, you should receive an email from me with a link to the recording, the resources that Tiffany and I talked about, a survey about the webinar, and the code to claim the CE. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to thank Tiffany again so much for sharing her time and her expertise with us.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone who came out today. I know our attention is very limited these days, and I appreciate you being here.
Yes, and if anyone would like to get in contact with me, I have my email at the end of the slide, so please feel free to reach out.
All right, I'm going to end the webinar. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.